In the year 1716, along the outskirts of colonial Lima, men began to vanish. Not peasants, not slaves, not criminals. They were plantation owners. Men with land deeds, armed guards, and legal protection from the Spanish crown. At first it was dismissed as coincidence. Then it happened again, and again, and again. Before we begin, I want to know something. Right now, somewhere in the world, you are listening to this story. Maybe you're alone in your room. Maybe you're driving through the dark. Maybe you're wearing headphones while everyone around you sleeps. Wherever you are, tell me in the comments which country you're listening from. Because stories like this didn't just happen in one place, they happened everywhere. And if you're still here, if you're choosing to listen knowing this story leads somewhere dark, then you're exactly the kind of person this channel is made for. So before we go any further, subscribe. Not for entertainment, not for comfort. Subscribe because some histories were buried on purpose, and once you hear them, they don't let you go. Now, let me tell you about the woman history tried to erase. 14 men would disappear over the course of 2 years. No bodies were found. No trials were held. No official investigation was ever completed. And at the center of it all was a woman history would later try to pretend never existed. Her name was Esperanza de Lima. Colonial Lima, a city built on silence. Early 18th century Lima was a city that smelled of ash and sugar. Coal furnaces burned day and night to process the wealth of the empire: silver, sugar, tobacco. The streets were lined with churches, warehouses, and plantations stretching beyond the city walls. Spain called it civilization. Those who lived beneath it called it something else. Slavery was not hidden. It was institutional. African slaves, indigenous laborers, mixed-blood servants, all legally owned, cataloged, and punished by law. Plantation owners were not merely businessmen. They were untouchable. Their word outweighed testimony. Their violence was classified as discipline. Their deaths, unthinkable. Until 1716. Esperanza, before the name meant fear, no birth record for Esperanza de Lima survives. What we know comes from fragments, church whispers, unsigned testimonies, and a single confiscated letter found decades later. She was believed to be born around 1689, the daughter of an enslaved woman and an unknown Spaniard. That made her legally nothing, not free, not fully enslaved, not protected. She grew up moving between households, kitchens, and plantations, watching men in fine coats issue punishments they never witnessed. She learned early that power never touched the ground it crushed. Esperanza did not scream. She did not rebel. She watched. And she remembered. The first death that wasn't called a murder: the first plantation owner disappeared in late autumn. His name was Don Mateo Rivas, a coal merchant, a sugar investor, known for his temper, known for what happened behind locked doors. One evening he rode out to inspect a furnace complex on the city's edge. He never returned. His horse was found the next morning, his coat folded neatly on a rail. The furnace still warm. Authorities ruled it an accident. They said he must have fallen. They said the fire consumed him completely. They said there was nothing to investigate. No one asked who last spoke to him. No one asked why his guards had been dismissed early that night. No one asked about the woman who worked the coal registers. A pattern emerges within 6 months. 3 more men vanished. All shared the same traits: plantation owners, financial ties to coal or sugar furnaces, known for extreme disciplinary practices. Last seen alone, whispers spread. Slaves spoke in fragments. Workers avoided certain furnaces. Guards refused night shifts. A name began to circulate, but only in private. Esperanza, not shouted, not written, only spoken when doors were shut. The woman who walked unnoticed. Esperanza did not hide. That was the most terrifying part. She walked freely through Lima, worked kitchens, managed furnace logs, spoke politely to priests and merchants. She knew how systems worked. She knew where men felt invincible. Coal furnaces were perfect. No screams carried over roaring fires. No remains survived long enough for proof, and accidents were expected. She did not kill in rage. She scheduled. Why no one stopped her? This is where the story becomes uncomfortable, because many people knew. Clerks altered records. Guards looked away. Workers followed instructions. Why? Because the men who disappeared were feared. Because reporting Esperanza meant returning to those men. Because justice, for the powerless, had never existed anyway. Esperanza was not seen as a murderer. She was seen as a reckoning. The 14th name. By the time the 14th plantation owner vanished, panic reached the colonial council. Not because of morality, because insurance claims piled up, because investors grew nervous, because Spain demanded explanations. An order was finally issued: find the woman. But by then Esperanza had already stopped, not because she was finished, but because someone had spoken. A single name appeared in a confidential report: a worker, a confidant, a betrayer. And for the first time in 2 years, Esperanza de Lima was no longer invisible. Return to the night. There are places where screams don't matter, not because no one hears them, but because the sound is expected. Coal furnaces were built for that purpose: roaring fire, metal groaning, air so loud it swallowed human sound whole. In 1716, on the outskirts of Lima, these furnaces burned day and night, and one of them became something else entirely. Why the furnace was perfect? Colonial authorities loved furnaces. They solved problems: dead animals, spoiled goods, industrial waste, and sometimes unofficially human remains. Accidents were common. Workers slipped. Heat collapsed lungs. Bodies were consumed quickly. No identifiable bones. No proof. No scandal. Esperanza understood this better than anyone. She had worked furnace logs for years. She knew which shifts were understaffed, which guards drank on duty, which foremen falsified numbers. Most importantly, she knew which men felt safest there. How she chose them. Esperanza did not hunt randomly. Each man shared three traits: legal immunity, men whose accusations never reached court; isolation habits, inspections done alone, without witnesses; arrogance, the belief no woman, no servant, no worker could touch them; they didn't see danger, they saw property. And Esperanza knew how to let them believe that until the last moment. The first furnace night, no one knows exactly what she said to Don Mateo Rivas, but records show something strange. That night the furnace schedule was altered, signed in handwriting later confirmed to be Esperanza's: an urgent inspection, a pressure imbalance, a risk to production. Things plantation owners cared about. Witnesses later said Don Mateo arrived calm, confident, smiling. He dismissed his guards himself. That decision mattered. What actually happened inside this is where history goes quiet. No trial testimony survives. No official confession exists. But multiple workers independently describe the same sequence years later. Esperanza did not attack immediately. She spoke. She recited names, dates, punishments that were never written down. Men laughed at first, then they didn't. When realization came, it came too late. The furnace doors were designed to seal from the outside. By the time Don Mateo understood that, the fire was already rising. No body was recovered, only ash and silence. Why the workers never spoke, here's the question historians ask. Why didn't anyone stop her? Because stopping her meant defending men who had never defended them. Workers knew the truth, but they also knew what happened to informants. Broken hands, missing family members, night arrests. Esperanza never threatened them. She only said one thing: you don't have to help me, just don't stop me. And they didn't. The ritual forms. By the third disappearance, a pattern emerged. Same furnace type, same night hours, same falsified logs. Esperanza always left one thing behind: a clean register. No discrepancies, no chaos. It wasn't rage. It was procedure. She turned execution into routine, and routine into invisibility. The men began to notice plantation owners started changing habits. They traveled in groups, hired extra guards, avoided night inspections. But greed is louder than fear. When profits were threatened, they still went, because furnaces meant money, and money meant control. Esperanza waited. The night of the fourth man screamed loud enough that two workers froze. Not in fear of him, but in fear of what they were witnessing. One later said, "The fire didn't feel angry, it felt final." That night, Esperanza washed her hands, signed the logs, and went home. No blood, no evidence, only another missing man. A whisper becomes a warning. By now, slaves warned each other. If you're sent to the furnaces at night, don't go. Guards refused certain posts. Priests heard confessions they could not record, and one word began appearing in prayers. Not God, not mercy, Esperanza. The mistake: Esperanza was careful, but no system survives forever. She trusted someone, a worker she'd known for years, someone she believed shared her silence. She told him one thing too many, and fear, real fear, finally entered the story. Because the men weren't the only ones watching anymore. The colonial council was counting losses. Spain was asking questions, and one terrified worker was about to choose survival over silence. MES without graves, 14 men vanished. No funerals, no coffins, no mourning bells, just empty estates and heirs who didn't ask questions. Because in colonial Lima, the dead did not deserve grief simply because they were rich. Especially not these men. Why history hides their NAMES official records list them as missing. Insurance documents call them lost assets. Church records barely mention them at all. Not because no one knew who they were, but because writing their stories down would have exposed something far worse than murder. It would have exposed how power was actually maintained. The first four, the disciplinarians, the first men to disappear, were known for the same thing: punishment. Not correction, not order, punishment as spectacle. Workers described whips soaked in brine, chains left on too long, confinement in heat until breath failed, all legal, all documented, all approved. Esperanza had seen these men up close. She didn't hear rumors, she carried memories. The man who broke the system, the fifth plantation owner, was different. Don Esteban Calderon, educated, respected, a council advisor. On paper, he was humane. In private, he pioneered something quieter: debt slavery. He trapped workers with impossible advances, falsified ledgers, and voluntary contracts that never ended. No bruises, no screams, just lives that vanished into paperwork. Esperanza hated him most because he smiled while destroying people. Why the church looked away: several of the 14 men donated heavily to the church. Chapels, altars, land grants. In return, priests ignored confessions they didn't want to hear. When the disappearances began, some clergy suspected the truth, but they said nothing, because condemning Esperanza meant defending men who funded salvation itself. Silence was easier. The seventh name, the one that changed everything, the seventh man to vanish, was connected to the crown, a direct investor for Spanish interests. His disappearance triggered panic, not grief, panic, because now the story threatened to reach Spain. Letters were written, audits ordered, quiet inquiries launched. Esperanza became more careful, not slower, smarter. What the men started doing wrong, fear changed them. They drank more, traveled unpredictably, trusted fewer people, but fear also made them reckless. They broke routines, skipped guards, ignored warnings. One man dismissed his escort because he didn't want witnesses near the furnace. Another refused to delay inspection despite illness. Every choice made in arrogance brought them closer to fire. The woman who never touched them hears the detail that unsettled later investigators. Esperanza was rarely seen using force. She didn't drag men, she didn't chase them. She invited them with ledgers, with production concerns, with calm authority. They walked into the furnace buildings on their own feet. That detail matters, because it shows how deeply the system trusted itself. The ninth and 10th disappearances by now, rumors reached the elite. Some men tried bribing guards for protection. Others threatened workers openly. One man had a servant beaten for mentioning Esperanza's name. He vanished 2 weeks later. Fear had crossed a line, and Esperanza noticed. The unwritten agreement among workers, something strange happened. They stopped asking questions. They stopped naming the dead. It wasn't celebration. It was relief. For the first time, power felt uncertain, and uncertainty terrified the men who were used to certainty. The 11th through 13th, these deaths happened faster, closer together, almost reckless. Esperanza sensed the window closing, authorities were circling, informants were nervous. The system was tightening. She accelerated, not out of panic, out of decision. The 14th man, the last man, was the most dangerous. Not the cruelest, not the richest, the most connected. If he survived, Esperanza would not. She waited weeks, studied his habits, then acted. After his disappearance, she stopped completely. No 15th. No mistake, just absence. 14 men were gone. And now the question was no longer who did it. The question was, who finally decided to talk, because somewhere in Lima, someone had already chosen fear over loyalty. Silence doesn't end loudly. It ends with a whisper, a word said too fast, a look held too long, a confession made to the wrong person. Esperanza de Lima understood systems, but even she underestimated fear. And fear was no longer theoretical. The man who couldn't sleep, the informant, was not brave. History often pretends otherwise, but bravery had nothing to do with it. He was a furnace worker, mid-level, trusted enough to handle records, disposable enough to be blamed. After the 13th disappearance, he stopped sleeping. Every knock sounded final. Every shadow felt watched. He knew something the authorities didn't yet know. Esperanza was finished. And when revolutions end, survivors look for sacrifices. The confession that wasn't meant to be heard, he didn't go to the authorities first. He went to a priest. Confession was supposed to be sacred. But the church had already chosen sides. The priest listened, didn't interrupt, didn't absolve. That same night, a sealed letter was sent to the colonial council. Esperanza's name appeared on official parchment for the first time. Why they didn't arrest her immediately, this part surprises people. The council didn't rush. They waited, because arresting Esperanza meant admitting 14 powerful men were dead. The system failed. Workers had helped. They needed control of the narrative. So they watched her, tracked her movements, questioned neighbors quietly, reviewed furnace logs going back years, and what they found terrified them. The records that shouldn't exist. Esperanza had kept copies, private ledgers, names, dates, signatures, proof not just of murder, but of abuse, corruption, and illegal punishment. If those records surfaced publicly, they would burn more than furnaces ever had. So the plan changed. This was no longer about justice. It was about containment. The night they came for her, they didn't come in uniform. No announcement, no warrant read aloud, just men in plain coats. They arrived before dawn. Esperanza was awake. She had been awake for hours. She did not resist. That detail appears in 3 independent accounts. She stood, dressed, walked with them, as if she had expected this moment all along. What she said on the way, no official transcript exists. But one guard later told his son what he heard. Esperanza asked a single question: will they remember why? No one answered. The interrogation that never became a trial. Esperanza was questioned for days, not about the men, about the records, where they were hidden, who had copies, who else knew. She answered selectively, enough to protect others, not enough to save herself. They realized something terrifying. Executing her publicly would make her a symbol. Letting her speak would make her a weapon. The decision made in secret, there would be no trial, no execution record, no martyrdom. Esperanza de Lima would be removed. How exactly is where history fractures. Some say prison, some say exile, some say a quiet death. What matters is this: after her capture, no furnace deaths occurred again. Not one. Part 9. The informants reward the worker who spoke. Expected protection. He received money, a new posting, a promise. 6 months later he disappeared too. No furnace, no fire, just absence. The system cleans up everything eventually. The city exhales. Plantation owners returned to routine. Guards relaxed. Records resumed normal. Falsifications. On the surface, order was restored, but something had changed. Men avoided furnaces at night. Workers remembered. Fear had shifted direction. Esperanza was gone, but the story wasn't finished. Because when historians later searched for her fate, they found nothing. No grave, no sentence, no execution, just a silence more deliberate than any before. History is loud about victories, precise about laws, obsessive about kings. But when it comes to certain people, history goes quiet. Esperanza de Lima did not receive a trial. She did not receive a sentence. She did not receive a grave. And that silence was intentional. Searching for her, and later historians searched everywhere. Court dockets, prison rolls, execution ledgers, exile manifests. Her name appears, then disappears. No death, no release, no transfer. For someone accused of killing 14 powerful men, this was impossible, unless the goal was not punishment, unless the goal was erasure. Why a trial would have destroyed them, a public trial would have forced questions. Why did no one stop her? Why did workers cooperate? Why were the men alone at furnaces? And the most dangerous question of all, What exactly were those 14 men doing that made so many people stay silent? The answers would have implicated the church, the colonial council, the crown's investors. So Esperanza became a problem that had to be solved quietly. There are three dominant theories. Theory 1, the prison she was held indefinitely under another name. No release, no execution, just disappearance through bureaucracy. Theory 2, exile she was transported to another colony. No records, no return, a woman without a past. Theory 3, the quiet death she was killed unofficially. No witnesses, no documents, just another body without a story. Which is true? No one knows, and that uncertainty is the point. The document that shouldn't exist in the late 1800s, a private collector discovered a damaged letter, unsigned, undated, but written in the same hand found on the furnace logs. One line stood out, "Fire ends bodies." But memory is harder to burn. The letter vanished soon after. Some say it was destroyed, others say it was taken. Either way, it changed nothing officially. What happened after no more plantation owners disappeared, but punishments became quieter, public spectacles declined, night inspections decreased, fear didn't vanish, it relocated. Esperanza had not destroyed the system, but she had marked it. How the story survived slaves told it in fragments. Workers whispered it to children. Women passed it down in kitchens and courtyards, not as a lesson in violence, but as proof of something rare, that even the most powerful systems have blind spots. And sometimes, those blind spots look like ordinary women. Why history doesn't teach her she didn't fit categories. Not a saint, not a general, not a revolutionary leader. She acted alone, without banners, without speeches, and that made her dangerous. Because her story suggests something authorities hate, that change doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just happens. The last question, did Esperanza believe she was right? No record answers that, but one detail survives. During her final interrogation, she refused to name herself a hero. She said only, "I did what the law would not." What you're really hearing, this isn't just a story about revenge. It's a story about silence, complicity, fear, and the cost of being untouchable for too long. Esperanza didn't create the fire. She used what was already burning. If you're still listening, then you understand why this story matters. Because somewhere in the world right now, there are names history won't record. People who vanish quietly. Wrongs that never reach court. If stories like this should be remembered, if buried histories deserve light, then stay with this channel. Subscribe, listen, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from, because silence only survives when no one is paying attention. And Esperanza de Lima, history tried to erase her. It didn't succeed.